Hey, it's Bret Amundson. Join myself and Dan Amundson this week on Sporting Journal Radio. Aaron Hebeisen, Tim Brass, and Matt Lee from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers are here to talk about things like this.
When the state gains that land, that becomes our land.
Erik Osberg from Otter Tail Lakes Country will join us to talk about how he and Randin Olson caught all those walleyes during their tournament last week.
If you don't live and breathe walleye fishing, a 16th ounce might sound really small, because it is.
And Joe Henry catches a big pike and a bunch of walleyes up at the angle. How did he do it?
I was so competitive, man. I was fishing in the dark. I'm like, and I was getting bit in the dark in that stained water.
We're not just a radio show anymore. Hunt, fish, listen, repeat. Broadcasting from the Camp Grilling Studios. This is Sporting Journal Radio. Presented by OnX. Know where you stand with OnX. That's a new personal best pike here. Now here's your host, Bret Amundson. That's right. Welcome to the show. We have a good one for you this week. We're going to talk to the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. A lot of the guys from Minnesota. They're either from Minnesota or live in Minnesota, and they're part of BHA. What is BHA all about? Are they a political organization? Do they lean one way or the other? What are they passionate about? And what issues are we facing right now that we should be aware of? We're going to talk to those guys. Aaron Hebeisen is here, also Tim Brass, and then Matt Lee as well. We'll kind of break down what the Rendezvous was. We had a couple local Minnesota guys that won the cook-off once again this year. We talked about last year's winners here on the show. We'll find out all about all of that coming up here in a little bit. Also, Erik Osberg talks about how he and Randin Olson caught their walleyes that got him in the money on a recent tournament on Otter Tail Lake. What did they use? How did it work? The water temps dropped significantly on day 2 of the tournament. Did they have to change tactics? We'll find out. And then Joe Henry used an unconventional way to catch walleyes and about a 20-pound pike up at the northwest angle. What did he use? We'll find out in a little bit. That's Dan Amundson right over there.
Hi.
How you doing, Dan?
Doing well.
Who are this week's sponsors?
Yeah, this week's show is brought to us by Hay Heights Campground and Resort on Devil's Lake. Book a trip to Devil's Lake. Learn more at haybellheights.com. Otter Tail Lakes Country. Find your inner otter at ottertaillakescountry.com. Lake of the Woods Tourism. Lake of the Woods is the walleye capital. Plan a trip for this summer at lakeofthewoodsmn.com. Camp Grayling, catch the Grand Slam, lake trout, pike, grayling, and walleye. Fish Camp Grayling this summer. OnX, know where you stand with OnX. Mid-Migration Outfitters, come hunt waterfowl out of heated 10-man pits and comfortable blinds this fall. Learn more info at midmigrationoutfitters.com. And Prairie Sportsman, watch episodes anytime at the new Prairie Sportsman YouTube channel.
Well, we finally got to do some fishing, Dan, the other day. It took us a little while to get out and start chasing walleyes.
Took you a little bit.
Well, yeah, I guess you were out for opener. I didn't get out right away. We ended up keeping more catfish than walleyes.
Well, yeah, I got made fun of a little bit for it, but catfish is delicious, fried up. It's white meat. It's great, and we've been talking about alternatives to keeping walleyes. If you want to let more walleyes go, which you should, let more walleyes go. Catfish are great. If you're in a lake or river, it's probably a river system that has catfish. Keep a couple. Keep a couple channel catfish. They're delicious. They fry up great. Get a good electric knife. I was using the Smith's consumer product, Lawaya. That's how you say that word. Electric knife. Use that. The flex blades. It filleted up real nice, and it's delicious.
You filleted some up and cooked some up. Used a mixture of shore lunch, right? Some Cajun and regular,
just
something like that.
Original shore lunch, pretty much.
And you're like, see if you can tell the difference. And I was trying to cheat. I was trying to look at the chunks and see the difference. And I was trying to look at the consistency of the meat. To be fair, I looked at 2 chunks and I just started eating it. I didn't care anymore. And it was hard to tell the difference. I'm sure if you really broke it down, you could maybe see some minute differences, but they're both delicious. And really, when you fry it up in the same coating, you're going to have a similar...
I cooked it and I couldn't tell the difference. Yeah. I tried to tell the difference and I couldn't. Oop.
When you fry stuff and put a same coating on it, it's going to be fairly similar. As long as the meat has some similar consistencies and some similar flavor profiles. And the water temps were in the 50s?
50s, yeah, low 60s. So yeah, it's cool water, and it was moving water to where we were. So that helps with keeping that meat cool. But I don't know, I guess you guys were talking about having that catfish meat be a little. I'm way out of focus. Having that catfish meat be mushy in warm water. I've never experienced that, I guess, but
Yeah,
It's typically in a river system. So
Yeah, and when we filmed that Prairie Sportsman episode with Del Werspin on the Minnesota River, he said he prefers catfish in the summertime. So we ate a bunch that day too, and it was probably 80 degrees, and they were delicious. So try catfish next time if you got an abundance of cats and you want to keep a few extra fish to eat. Try some catfish; they're delicious. It is that time of year. People are excited. They're seeing fawns already. We've been seeing goslings now for a couple of weeks. I think we're going to start seeing ducklings soon because I did see this blue-winged teal nest when I was out walking through some of the grass. This was kind of neat. So I threw a little camera up I wanted just a short video of this hen working on the nest. So she came in and I think she saw the camera at first and was like, I'm just going to slowly work my way into the nest, but she definitely got comfortable, and I ran that camera there for about 10 minutes on her or something like that, and she settled in and sat on those eggs for a while. And I'm glad I did that because I came out 2 days later. After I did this, I wanted to give her a couple of days just to, rest up and not have a camera right next to the nest and let her get comfortable again. And I went back to check on it a couple of days later, and the nest had been raided. So we've had a lot of raccoons around here, which have been known to be ground nest predators and ground nest raiders. So unfortunately, this nest, which had about 13 blue-winged teal eggs in it, there was only about 2 left that didn't get broken into. So it's early. She should re-nest, but when ducks re-nest, the clutch size generally gets smaller as they do that. So it's a tough life for those birds. And man, she was in 1.5 foot tall grass, just trying to hide, hope nobody saw her there. And that's a tough life having a nest like that. And we need to protect our waterfowl, kind of like what the Lacey Act did 122 years ago. So this week was the 122nd anniversary of the Lacey Act. Now that was signed in 1900, and essentially that became the beginning of the end of market hunting. So back in the day, when European settlers spread out across the country, they lived off the land. They lived off of wild animals primarily. And then as expansion grew and agriculture grew, those wild birds, particularly in Minnesota, the prairie chicken population expanded and went all the way across the state of Minnesota, following ag as it expanded across the state. And then as native prairie disappeared, those numbers kind of came back down, and now we just have a remnant population of around 5,000 or so in the northwest part of the state. But people lived off that wild game, and then as the population expanded, they started selling that wild game to restaurants in New York and Chicago. Waterfowl, prairie chickens, grouse became popular table fare. So they would shoot, hundreds of them, load them up on rail cars, and then ship them off to the city. Well, that did a huge number on our populations, of course. So in 1900, they hit the Lacey Act because people were crossing state lines. They were poaching these birds and then transporting them illegally. So the Lacey Act eliminated that. And then in 1913, there was something called the Weeks-McLean Act, and that basically started to outlaw some of the market hunting that was out there, but it didn't have enough teeth. So in 1918, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was signed, and that essentially banned spring hunting. It banned market hunting and market selling of migratory waterfowl. And that's why today, if your buddy wants a mallard, you got to write down your license number because you can't sell it to him. So if you've ever wondered why you can't just give somebody some wild game, it all kind of goes back to the conservation and the rules that were formed because of market hunting 100 some years ago. Read more about it at sportingjournalradio.com. All right, we're going to learn more about conservation and public land opportunities and other legislative type issues that are out there concerning hunters and anglers with the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers crew. They're next on Sporting Journal Radio.
Devil's Lake is legendary, and this summer has been legendary for walleyes. Don't miss out. Call Hay Heights Campground and Resort today to book one of their modern cabins on East Bay. The cabins are furnished with a full bathroom, kitchen, and all the amenities like high-speed internet, and are clean following CDC guidelines. Staying at Hay Heights gives you full access to a private boat launch, fish cleaning station, and beach area. Learn more at haybellheights.com. That's haybellheights.com. Plan your trip to legendary Devil's Lake today.
All right, here at Sporting Journal Radio, we feel it's really important to get involved, make sure that you are speaking up when it comes to issues that are important to hunters and anglers. Be a member in various advocacy groups or conservation organizations. And we're going to talk about one right now that's been very active the last few years. It's a Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And we have a few guests to join us on the show right now. We've got Aaron Hebeisen, the chapter coordinator from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. Aaron, how you doing?
Good, Bret. Thanks for having us.
Welcome to the show. Also, Tim Brass, the Field Operations and State Policy Director. Tim, thanks for coming on the show.
You bet. Thanks for having us.
And Matt Lee, the Minnesota Chapter Chair. Matt, how you doing?
Great. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Tim, you're from Minnesota originally, but now in Colorado, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I grew up just outside the Twin Cities in Stillwater, and jumped around a little bit, lived in Wisconsin for a bit, then Oregon, and now I live in Colorado.
What made you end up in Colorado?
So I was working out of Oregon. I was working for the U.S. Forest Service, and my wife decided that she was interested in going after a second master's degree. So as she was making that leap, we were looking for a place to live that was still, close to public lands and close to the mountains, but was also closer to family. And my brother lives up here in Fort Collins, and so that was kind of the short of it.
You also worked with the Cooperative North American Shotgunning Education Program. What the heck is that?
I did, yeah. Yeah, I worked for a guy by the name of Tom Roster, who has done a great deal of research over the years with regards to non-toxic shot. And as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was implementing the non-toxic shot requirements for waterfowl many years ago, Tom was pretty instrumental in that process. And, since then has helped develop a lot of the educational materials, those charts that you find either on the side of your box of ammo or, inside the regulation books, which provide recommended shot size for various species of waterfowl. He was, a key researcher in pulling all that together. So my work was more focused on doing research on some of the new higher end tungsten alloys, heavy shot, and so forth. It was a great job, and never thought I would actually get paid to hunt, but I did.
Good gig if you can get it.
Yeah, it was all right.
What do you think about the future here as far as non-toxic goes? I think you'll see lead eliminated from all hunting, at least, particularly on public lands in the near future, I think.
Yeah, that may be. I think that as an organization, BHA has really adopted a voluntary approach. We are formal partners with the North American Non-Lead Partnership. And as part of that partnership, the goal is really to provide educational materials and make sure that hunters have the information needed to make a good choice when they head afield. And so that's been the approach we've been taking to date.
We did a story on copper bullets for rifles versus lead for deer hunters here in Minnesota. We did a segment on Prairie Sportsman, and I really hadn't seen that type of demonstration before. I hadn't been there, at least to witness it firsthand, and just to see the fragmentation of lead versus the retention of a copper bullet. Just the amount of lead that I probably ingested from eating deer over the years back when I used to rifle hunt quite a bit. I don't want to eat lead personally. I don't like it. And their big push when they put that demonstration on was also not a mandate to non-toxic, but a voluntary effort. And the reasoning behind that, saying that if more and more people get into shooting non-toxic, that's going to increase demand, that's going to increase production, and that's going to bring down the cost of production materials and production machinery. And then the non-toxic alternatives, the prices will come down and then become more affordable, more comparable to lead prices. And then people will just stop shooting lead because it doesn't cost any less at that point.
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly the approach that we have taken as an organization. And I think the market forces that you mentioned, I think it's a long-term kind of development. And especially given some of the ammo shortages right now, I think that really is particularly true at this moment. But I shoot copper myself, and for the very reasons you described there. I've seen what it can do, and you maybe hit a bone that you weren't intending to, and have actually seen some of the fragments in an animal that I shot. And when my daughter was born, I just decided that was a pretty simple choice, and switched over to shooting barns a few years back.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And I mean, my shots are perfect every time. But
yeah, right.
Now, all right. Well, let's talk about BHA a little bit, and as an organization, what you guys stand for, and what is the overall goal of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers?
Yeah. So we are a nonprofit sportsman conservation organization. We're membership driven. And we were organized by a group of folks out of Oregon. Who got around a campfire and decided that, there really wasn't a sportsman organization out there that spoke up for that DIY public land hunter and angler who really valued that solitude, that challenge, and the reward that our public lands and waters provide. And so this group of folks, this was, I think as I mentioned back in 2004, this group of folks took it upon themselves to start to recruit folks into the ranks and, build a voice for hunters and anglers that would really speak up for all species, those large intact tracts of fish and wildlife habitat and the backcountry landscapes, as the name suggests. So, our focus of work has really been around access and opportunity, public lands and waters conservation, and then a little bit of work on fair chase, namely banning drones, and also working on some of the captive cervid issues at a state-by-state basis. So.
And what does a state policy director do?
Yeah, good question. So, I'm the state policy and field operations director. So I kind of wear two hats, but work with our field team. We have 17 field staffers across the country. Aaron is one of our newer hires, and help work to support them and the chapters to help advance our work at the chapter level. And so, yeah.
What I probably should have warned you that I was going to ask this question, but when you deal with politics as much as you do, is there a stance? Does BHA say we're neutral when it comes to left, right, center, things like that? And there's accusations you guys being one way or the other. What do you tell people when they ask you about that?
Yeah, great question. We are a bipartisan organization, and we really strive to advance policy that has bipartisan support. And I think that approach really reflects our membership base. When we poll our members, we have consistently found that our members are very diverse politically, as well as demographically. Politically, our membership breaks down roughly in thirds: a third Democrat, a third Republican, and a third independent. And so, in order to really serve that diverse membership, it's essential that we maintain that bipartisan approach.
You have to, and it's so hard these days. And I joke that I'm a conservative that cares about conservation. So I think, I definitely lean right in so many ways. But when it comes to, some of the hunting and fishing and outdoor access, public land issues and things like that, I think it's something that the right gets wrong in a lot of cases.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think that approach to, working with conservatives that share our interest in conservation, I think it's proven to be pretty successful. I mean, we've, in the last few years at the federal level, we've enjoyed some pretty massive wins with the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, which provides, full and permanent funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, as well as some money for public land maintenance. Most recently, the passage of the Maplands Act, which will help enhance public access to our federal lands. I mean, that was carried with by conservative sponsors. As well as Democratic. There's a really long list, and whether that be at the federal level or the state level, we're willing to work with both parties who share our interest in conservation and public access.
When it comes to a show like this, it really helps the ratings if you get people really fired up and get two different sides fighting against each other. So I'm going to ask a really controversial question right now. Which is the better school for people that want to work in wildlife, Bemidji or Stevens Point?
Easy. Stevens Point all the
way. Dan went to Bemidji over there, so...
Oh, okay.
Those words. Wrong.
I'm over now. Huh?
See you later. See you next week.
That's funny. All right. Matt Lee is with us too. And Matt is the Minnesota chapter chair. And Matt, you grew up fishing and chasing pheasants in western Minnesota. And then you had an influential trip to the Boundary Waters, I'm finding out. You also said that without access to public lands, I would not be the person I am today. Was it that trip to the Boundary Waters that inspired that quote, or was it public lands dotted across western Minnesota?
Nah, it's public lands dotted across western Minnesota, northwest Iowa. I moved to Minnesota in high school, and it was really influential for me to be out and be able to hunt and fish on lands in northwest Iowa prior to the age of 16, 17. And then when I moved to western Minnesota, holy cow, are there lots of beautiful uplands to be out there in. It's just that probably more than anything. The Boundary Waters is an extremely special place. Don't get me wrong. That certainly had an influence. That same summer, I had taken a backpacking trip to Wyoming as well, in the Bighorn Mountains, another beautiful chunk of public land. So just general influence of accessing public lands and waters, growing up fishing. It's just certainly kept me grounded in life. That
Boundary Waters is a special place. I used to call it one of my favorite places on the planet. Still is. I don't get up there as often as I haven't been up there for a number of years, as a matter of fact. But we used to go there every year growing up as a kid. Canoe trips, camping trips up there. A lot of memories from that growing up. What was it on that trip to the Boundary Waters that was influential for you?
Probably mostly the solitude. Just we went out in a group of 10 or 12 of us at the time. I can't remember anymore. And we really didn't see maybe one or two other groups over a 7-day trip in the wilderness. And that was just fantastic. Did a little bit of fishing, portaging and paddling. It was a slightly more relaxing trip than the other portion of our group had taken. And so it was just the time to decompress in nature and experience it. It was what impacted me the most.
No, I get it. It's so nice to be up there, and the fishing and the camping, you're right. But I wouldn't include the portaging in there as much as the enjoyable parts. That's just me.
Maybe it's my time in the artillery that's helped me to embrace the suck, I guess. But
yeah,
the other end.
What's worse, carrying 70 pounds of military gear on your back, or taking a canoe straight up a rock face in the Boundary Waters?
I haven't, fortunately, had to go straight up a rock face in the Boundary Waters with a canoe on my back, but with what I did in the artillery, I wasn't able to drop my rucksack. So I was always carrying the radios and the batteries, and it got heavy. There were some slogs at Camp Ripley through the marshes that were just brutal. I would take that canoe any day.
What is it with the Boundary Waters right now? What's going on, and what should we be concerned about?
Well, right now we've got a mining company, a Chilean-owned mining company that had some leases within about 3 to 6 miles of the edge of the Boundary Waters, where they want to dig and pull out copper and nickel mined or tailings from the not tailings. They want to pull out copper nickel laced ore from the ground, and in that process of breaking down that rock, it exposes a lot of sulfur. And when that is exposed to the air and rain, it then leaches all that sulfur out into the environment. And you're looking at an area that's got a significantly high water table. Mm-hmm. You know, it's one thing to mine this copper in a desert environment, which is where most of our copper, I think, comes from in the United States. To hitting it in the Boundary Waters is a significant supply of fresh water for the state of Minnesota. That watershed actually becomes the Rainy River, and which flows into Lake of the Woods. I mean, those are some Lake Vermilion, Rainy Lake, Lake of the Woods. Those are some premier fishing waters in the state of Minnesota. And if we're looking at potentially contaminating that water, not to mention just the volume of fresh water that's there, it just doesn't make sense in this environment with the technology that we have today to mine there.
I'm surprised that Canada has Canada been involved in that discussion then?
Not to my knowledge. They haven't been too involved with that. They actually do some mining in this type of watersheds up in Western Ontario. They also had a huge mine tailings dam break several years ago in British Columbia. And it's just acid-laced tailings water washed down a whole river valley. We're not there yet. We do not have the technology to protect our environment and resources from this type of mining in this wet of an environment.
And to break it down, I mean, the argument for it is jobs and money, right? And the argument against it is obviously clean water in our environment. I mean, we all like to create jobs, and that's an important thing. But
it's you know, in a lot of ways, it's an argument of jobs and money versus jobs and money, and where those jobs and monies are going to. Are they going to go to a billion-dollar tourism industry in the state of Minnesota, or are we going to put them into the mining industry, where a lot of those profits are going to be taken back out of the state and even out of the country right now? Mm-hmm. I don't see long-term where those economics equal out, because if we do destroy this environment, not only can we only use it for mining, and once that dries up, we've got nothing left. Can't use it for recreation.
You know, you brought up something I think that's important to talk about right now, too, and that's the tourism industry in Minnesota and how important fishing just itself is. Do you feel like sometimes our legislature or our I think our tourism people are, for the most part, pretty much on board, but sometimes I feel like they even miss the mark and don't realize how important fishing is to this state. Is that an important topic? Do you feel that we need to make sure they remember how important fishing is, and maybe we should spend a little bit of money on it?
Oh, for sure. You know, a big chunk of our funding at the state level for the DNR comes from hunting and fishing license dollars, right? And being involved with the R3, which is a recruiting, retention, and reactivation community, finding new hunters and fishermen out there is important to the future of the funding models for the DNR. And right now, we're not doing enough to create more hunters and fishermen. And if we need to get, the state tourism board to put more into that, we should. Do we need to keep the legislature from monkeying with regulations and let the DNR do its job? Because they do have good people in fisheries and wildlife to set regulations for what we can take from our waters and our lands.
What did you think about that recent MinFish state of fishing summit that they held, where the 2 points that they brought up were more public accesses on our lakes, which it was good to bring it up because I didn't realize that we had so many lakes without a public access on it. We hear so much about all this public water in Minnesota and how it's all owned by, it's all the water is public and you can do whatever you want on it, this and that for the most part. I didn't realize how many were without public accesses. And the other one was about stocking. But what does BHA feel about increasing public? I mean, obviously you must like public accesses on lakes.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of our tenets. We not only do we want to see more public land and better access and better maintenance of our public lands, we want to see more and better access to our public waters.
So is that something that you would, join up with MinFish or just kind of help the cause out a little bit?
Absolutely. We take a look at what their policy statement is, and as a 501c3 organization, we obviously have to stay non-political in this process so we can advocate for the waters, the fish, and the public having access to that. That's where we need to evaluate that. And if they need our help, we'll certainly get on board with that.
And then have you guys, obviously you guys pay attention to what's going on at the Capitol. What do you think's been going on in this latest session that we should be aware of or concerned about maybe?
Well, right now there's some differences going on with the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund reauthorization. One party wants to wait and not advance that. It's going to be a ballot initiative to the state voters. That's the lottery money that we get, where a portion of the lottery dollars go to fund public lands. That constitutional amendment should be back on the ballot in 2024 for reauthorization. So the biggest thing I can say to all your viewers and listeners is that reach out to your legislators, ask them where they stand on this issue. Do they support continuation of the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, and at what level? Because right now we'd like to get it back to 50% of the state's lottery proceeds to go into the NRTF. And there are, on both sides of the aisle, folks are trying to get their fingers on a little bit of the excess monies.
Oh, yeah.
SF 4131, if you're looking for an actual bill, is there.
SF 4131.
SF 4131 was the one that was most recently.
Yeah, that's important.
Passed unanimously out of Senate.
So 50 it used to be 50%. What is it now?
It was, I can't remember off the top of my head what it is now. It was 50%. It got reduced after the financial crisis in 2008, and it's taken till this year to get that spending back. But the state's balance sheet has been in pretty solid standing since 2012 or 13.
Well, there's a little bit of money there right now in the Twins. A little bit of a budget surplus going on right now that sounds like they're all finding ways to spend money on stuff and our tax dollars. It's good stuff. Anyway, that ENTRF, of course, LCCMR, Prairie Sportsman is kind of one of their projects that they really like, and that's one of the reasons why we do so much on conservation in the show and water quality and things that are important to the environment, because we are funded from that lottery money as well too. And that's a good chunk of money, and that's something that the voters said, yes, if we're going to have this lottery, we want this money going to the environment in Minnesota. So for them to keep chipping away at it and taking it and doing other things with it, I hope people realize that that's happening. That's something that they voted for, and they're trying to take the money and do other things with it, because I don't think a lot of people will be real happy about that.
I think you're right. I don't think people really do pay close enough attention to what their legislators are doing. Whether you're in the metro or you're in greater Minnesota, we need to pay better attention to what our legislators are doing in our name, because these are our lands, these are our waters.
Yeah.
We need to have access and opportunity to use them.
And I also think this is the last thing I'll say about it, then we'll move on, but I don't think people in Minnesota always realize just how good we've got it here. When you were in Iowa and you talked about the public lands, you didn't really say what it was like in Iowa, but you said your eyes opened up a little bit when you came to Minnesota. What's the public land situation like in Iowa compared to Minnesota?
It's significantly less. If I remember off the top of my head, I think less than 2% of the land in Iowa is held in public trust. That's not much. I was fortunate.
Water.
Say that again.
Land and water?
That's land and water, 2%.
Okay. 2% land and water in Iowa. There's not a lot of lakes in Iowa, honestly. I grew up near one. But I also grew up in a part of the state that had a little bit more of that public land. And then we had a family friend that was a farm manager. And that's one of the ways we were able to get access. So,
well, I've hunted around the country a little bit too, and I run into people a lot that say, "Oh, you're from Minnesota. You guys have all those lakes. You do a lot of fishing up there. Do you have to pay to fish those lakes?" And I'll look at them and do I have to pay to fish? And in a lot of states, the only lakes that they have are reservoirs or private ponds or something that they have to pay to access. So we've got it pretty good here. And this question could be for any of you guys. Actually, what is the balance? What is the balance between the right amount of public land versus private land? Because I do see how some landowners would say, well, gosh, that my neighboring property, and this we saw, this kind of played out not too far in Lackaparle County in recent years, where a landowner wanted to sell some of his land to the state and turn it into public land. The county objected. Some of the other landowners objected. It was marginal farmland. It wasn't great for growing anything on. It was next to some public land already, so it made sense to increase that public land. But I can see it. Say I'm running a farm and I got a bunch of kids and they want to go start their own farm. They want to have their own land to grow crops on or whatever. Or for someone like me that spends so much time on public lands and rely on public lands for hunting and fishing opportunities, but there's a part of me that's saving up. I want to have my nice own chunk of private land that I can recreate on and hunt and fish on and manage it and bow hunt it and whatever. Where's that balance? I feel like a lot of people would love to have their own little private wildlife kingdom, but you have to have public land. So is there a stance that BHA takes on where that balance is?
Organizationally, we don't have a specific stance. I think it's really a conversation, and I think that conversation plays out at the local level and in ways very much as you just described there out in Lackaparle County, which is actually where I grew up hunting on public land. But on the flip side, I think you have states like Nevada and Utah. I mean, Nevada's somewhere around 80% public, and it works. And so, I think the 80% in Nevada versus 2% in Iowa, there's a lot of folks in Iowa right now calling for a bit more public land. And I think that conversation it looks different based on where you are and the history there, and the growing demands for recreation, I think, are really helping spur a greater call for more public land. I mentioned the Great American Outdoors Act earlier, which is a source of funding for acquiring new public land that passed here just a couple of years back, and will be providing funds for new acquisitions here moving forward. And I think in states like Minnesota, the sales tax and having funds like that available to acquire parcels of private land strategically where there's a willing seller, I think is super important.
So one other question about that, and I think one worry that I even have at times is when you do turn something over to the to the government. I don't always trust that they have our best interests in mind. So I could see how someone might say, well, gosh, we turn all this land over to the state or the government, whatever, they own this. And yeah, they're supposed to keep it as open for the public forever. What safeguards do we have in place to make sure? And to be honest, in Minnesota, there's been discussions of reorganizing the DNR and discussions of changing how the wildlife management areas are used and to making them more open for everybody. That worries me. It sounds like most of us have spent time in Lac Parle County probably chasing pheasants around. If you go into a WMA, in Western Minnesota, and you start making changes to it in the effort to make it more open for everyone, you start putting bike paths in there or observation decks or whatever that might be, you're going to ruin a lot of that pheasant hunting. So I worry a little bit about what could happen to some of our public land. So I could see how somebody might say, well, gosh, if the state takes over this land, what are they going to do with it? What safeguards are in place if we do get more public land that's going to be used the right way?
Well, first off, when the state gains that land, that becomes our land. It's not the state's. It's held in trust for the people of Minnesota. It's up to us to hold our legislators and our agencies responsible for maintaining and keeping those lands in good shape. If that means we need to advocate for proper funding to maintain the lands we've got, that's what we need to do. That's how we need to reach out to our legislators and be in contact with them that way. But to your point on the people management areas, I guess that I've heard the discussion about, I don't know how that's going to work. I know one of the things they've tried to do in the Lac Parle County area is get prairie chickens back, right? Mm-hmm. They've really struggled to do that. The landscape just isn't quite big enough. We don't have enough public lands to really get all of those birds reestablished. And so if you're talking about breaking up a wildlife management area, which it's in the name, it's there for the benefit of wildlife first and foremost, right? If you're going to break that up with walking paths, whether they're mowed or asphalt, what impact are we going to have on animals? Mm-hmm. If we're going to add more off-highway vehicle trails, what impact will that have on the deer population on those lands? Right? It's you talked about it a little bit earlier. What's enough? How do we weigh the use benefit versus the cost benefit on some of those things, and what are we willing to give up, and what do we want to keep as far as our hunting opportunities? I mean, I haven't been sold on the idea yet of making wildlife management areas more accessible.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, and that's too bad about the prairie chickens. I know Dave Traube worked pretty hard on that, as well as a bunch of other guys too. And I think they're neat birds. And I've been further up north in Minnesota where you can see the remnant population up there and chase them around a little bit. They're pretty cool prairie grouse. What else is going on in Minnesota that BHA has got on their radar?
So there's a few things that Minnesota chapter engages on. If I'm talking to somebody and they're asking about the Minnesota chapter, like kind of the elevator pitch, we focus on CWD, obviously the Boundary Waters protections, and then you were just talking about WMAs. We kind of engaged a little bit on timber management on WMAs.
Oh yeah,
there's folks out there who, because it's state managed, would like to see those forests profiting a little bit more, and seeing some income be generated by those forests, and folks that would like to extract timber from them. And again, we're holding the stance of it's a wildlife management area. It's designed to be productive for wildlife, not for extractive purposes. Now, it's not to say that there aren't places where logging can't improve habitat, and in those places we certainly advocate for doing that, but we think that should be up to the wildlife biologist to have that input and make those decisions, and really tell us where, hey, yes, this is a place that we can manage those areas for timber and will also help wildlife populations.
Yeah, because some of that logging can be real beneficial for wildlife. Yeah,
absolutely. Those are kind of the big three, like I said, elevator pitch that I talk to people about right now. Chronic wasting disease, the boundary waters, and that timber management. We also are advocating for responsible use of OHV trails. There's a lot of really good OHV trails, obviously, with having two major manufacturers in the state. We don't want to say, people shouldn't be out there with OHVs and ATVs, but we do think there's some areas that should be managed and kept for that solace and that solitude.
Man, it is so hard to please everybody, right?
Absolutely.
It's so tough. It's a difficult job to do, but I think you manage it on a case-by-case basis and do what makes sense and where it makes sense. You worked, when you brought up CWD, were you working with the Minnesota DNR then? Is that what you said? You worked?
Yep. I was, so as an intern at Iowa State, I was, which, let's be real, those are better than both Stevens Point or Bemidji. But I went to Iowa State as an animal ecology major and worked for the USDA there in disease research. And through that, was able to do an internship with the Minnesota DNR in 2010 when there was kind of that spike of CWD down in the Pine Island area. So I went and sat in the trailers over the weekend, and you heard everything from CWD is as made up as Bigfoot to it is the worst thing since the Black Plague, and every opinion in between. So you really got a range of folks, and that was 12 years ago at this point. And I think it's been nothing but more politicized. And so we're just trying to do as much as we can to stick to the facts, see what science-based research can provide us, while we try and mitigate it when we can and where we can. And I know you've talked about it before, but at this point, a lot of that research points back to the captive cervid farms. A lot of those cases have come up near those captive cervid farms. And so us, along with coalition partners, some of the tribes, are trying to work to do what we can to bring awareness to folks about that, and maybe add some more restrictions around those farms.
Yeah, I think the majority of them have been around captive cervid farms, and I don't want to fault a guy for trying to create a business and make a buck, but clearly there's an issue, and we need to figure out how to. What is it? Just pay these guys and to depopulate all the farms and pay these guys and just get them out of Minnesota? What is the answer?
I don't know if there's a silver bullet for it. That is certainly something we've talked about, whether that's a mandatory or a voluntary buyout option. But you talked earlier about being, conservative, except for when it comes to, some of the environmental causes. I guess I kind of fit myself into that same boat. And when somebody asked, where do we stand? I tell them I'm a hook and bullet environmentalist. These are the things I care about, clean water, clean air, public access, because I want to go and use them. And to me, that's what a conservationist is, somebody who wants to go and use these places, not just to preserve them, but to use them. And I think there's a lot of folks, luckily, that might fall on that side, that are hardcore hunters and anglers who maybe fall more conservative. However, they would classify themselves as a deer hunter first. And I think that's the crowd that needs to be brought aware of this. I know that some of the conversations I've had, they've been very open to, this is where I fall, as far as political lines typically, but I'm a deer hunter first, and we got to see those. I would rather have deer in perpetuity than see a few farms benefit in the short run.
I feel like CWD is still relatively small in Minnesota, and maybe that's due to some of the efforts that have taken place to try to wipe out, I don't want to use the term wipe out a herd, but that's kind of what they do. They try to eliminate the deer from the hot spots to try to keep it from spreading. States like Wisconsin have a much higher CWD rate. It doesn't seem like they're really doing anything about it. What else is going on to fight it around the country? What's working? What's not working? Who is caring about it? Who's not caring about it? Right now, because the University of Minnesota has the RT quick test that they're trying to get, work through, I kind of feel like we are at the forefront of it here in Minnesota. We sort of have an obligation as the conservation organizations in this state to
be the leader on it because our university is leading on it. So, some of the other, you're right. Wisconsin is taking a lesser approach, a less aggressive approach. They see higher prevalence rates on those deer. But if you turn in a deer in Wisconsin and it gets tested positive, they give you a new tag. So it incentivizes more people to not lose out if they're going to, test positive. I think there's a lot of folks in Minnesota, just anecdotally talking to them, that think, well, if I don't get it tested, then I can assume it's not positive, right? And I think that if those people were willing to get them tested without the fear of it being lost, or possibly being able to reimburse the tag, it might be a way to incentivize more folks to focus on it and pay attention to it.
I think that's a great idea, actually. What else are you seeing in other states that could work here in Minnesota? Maybe what you saw something down in Missouri with the sales tax down there?
Oh yeah. So in and that was just, I was down there turkey hunting, getting my butt whooped on public land birds down there.
Yeah.
That one's from Minnesota. So I got lucky in Minnesota, but then I went down and part of my job now is to see and learn the differences and the things that are working. Obviously, I've been involved with the Minnesota chapter since like 2016. So know the Minnesota chapter and know our model very well, but to learn how public-private land interactions and the way that those different conservation agencies manage their wildlife has been a real eye-opener. Like you talked about Iowa having 2% of public land. Illinois has 3%. Missouri has a little bit more, but what they do in Missouri is that 1/8 of a percent of any money generated from sales tax goes back to conservation. So to put it in, I guess, easier terms, you go buy a fast food meal for $8, a penny of that is going back to conservation directly. And that turns out to be about $26 million, to the tune of $26 million a year annually that goes back to conservation. And when I was down there, they have an incredible kind of mosaic that sort of mimicked, a blend of Midwest public land where you see, forests and marshes and some of the normal wilder wilderness scenes, but then you also see some sort of like reminiscent of BLM land where there's people out and they're able to farm it or graze it on public land in those states. And then so they're generating revenue and by leasing those lands out for agricultural purposes, but then they're also being able to turn those into, I can walk across that ag field to get to that river bottom area to go hunt it. And then while I was there, getting washed out in the middle of the day from the rain, I took a little drive around and found myself on this slough that, great, beautiful graded parking lot on the gravel road that had a duck blind overlooking this marsh. And it was a permanent duck blind. Yep, you can see it there, that their conservation agency had built that anybody can go and use. You just drive up, you park, you can brush it in if you want, but it overlooks that pond and it's public there for anybody to use. I thought that was a really cool thing that they offered the public.
I wonder if we were down in Missouri at the same time, because we hunted.
I think we were.
We hunted through a midday thunderstorm and it was wild. Like
I talked to some folks down there who said that you and Corey were down there, and I think we were probably hunting pretty similar areas.
Man, it was nutty. Like there was lightning hitting all around us, and we were trying to sneak on these turkeys. I don't know if you can find any of those clips right now, Dan, or not, but we were trying to find these turkeys. We had spotted them down this, kind of bottomland along this creek, this flat. And so we were down, and the creek banks were pretty high, so we could sneak down along them. And there was places where we were walking through waist deep water. As the waters were rising, the rain was like torrential downpour. We did not shoot a turkey, but it was a memorable hunt nonetheless.
You're in good company.
It was fun, yeah. And I think there's a reel on Instagram on I think Corey Loeffler shared it. I put it together, but I think Corey put it out on his page that you can see that hunt if you go see Corey Loeffler's Instagram page. You can see it. But I will say this about turkeys down there. We struggled. I mean, we shot a couple birds, but we struggled. And everybody that we talked to there, and we also hunted Nebraska, they all said the numbers were down. And I don't know if you heard the same thing or if you experienced that while you're down there, but it sounded like numbers were down there.
Yeah, I heard that too. And I don't, you can blame, I came up on a coyote at one location. I came up on, obviously a ton of rain. So you can blame weather, you can blame predators, you can blame, hunting seasons. I've heard that if we potentially would push back hunting seasons to not be right in the peak of breeding, that would maybe allow more hens to lay before males are shot, and that might increase bird numbers. It's one of those things that sort of like ducks too. You could call it because it's drought. You could call it because it's predators. It's probably a big swirling equation of all those things.
Yeah. Well, we saw a ton of raccoons when we were down there, particularly in Nebraska. As soon as you get an hour before sunset, the turkeys would disappear, and every single field had raccoons running around in it. And I don't think there's many people other than Sam Sohold. I don't think anybody's really trapping raccoons much anymore. Right. So maybe we need some more trapping on some ground nest predators. And then somebody else brought up something while we were down there, and that was that there's a lot more fertilizer being used from that's using turkey waste, maybe is the right word for it right now. Okay. And that these turkeys or other birds are then eating it when they feed in these ag fields, and that maybe somehow there's some sort of connection between the type of fertilizer that's being used and the turkeys. I don't know. I hadn't heard that one before, but I don't know. It sounds like, I think our numbers are down a little bit here where I'm at. I've also heard that maybe some of these areas turkeys were introduced to not that long ago. And I feel like what I've been hearing is that turkeys, they get reintroduced to an area. They're hardy birds. They're tough. They're strong. They populate the area quickly. The population does really well. And then the land realizes like, hey, you guys got way too many turkeys here. And they just, they shrink back down to the carrying capacity of that area.
I think you're right on that too. I mean, I've been hunting turkeys hard for the last 5 years. And I think probably in the last 10, we've started to sort of see numbers decline. But 10 years ago, which I didn't have turkeys 10 years ago. I started hunting Minnesota when I was 12 and graduated high school in 2008. And up to that point, we didn't have a turkey season because there wasn't enough turkeys that far north. So right. I think we sort of missed that gap of when they were like in their prime. And I've seen decent numbers here in southeastern Minnesota, but I didn't really have any base of comparison. So if my baseline is already up here and then they're dropping to this carrying capacity, then it seems like, numbers are getting worse, but maybe this is where they should have been originally.
Leveling out. Yeah, for sure. So one other population that has done, I don't know if doing well is the right word for it or not, but apparently in Montana, elk are doing really well, and there's a lawsuit now brought up by property owners against the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, stating that they've grown the elk herd too high. Have you guys, any of you guys, been paying attention to this and following this? Tim?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, we've been following it. And we actually just recently agreed to join the state in defense of the elk management scheme there, and fight against the lawsuit that's been filed by the United Property Owners of Montana. They are arguing that the elk numbers are too high, that the legislature should have control over management, amongst other things. And we are working with a coalition of other sportsmen and women organizations that, share an interest in ensuring that, we can maintain hunting opportunity up there and healthy elk populations, and ensure that the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks management authority is retained. And yeah, it's
is this
big one.
Is this a situation where, similar to what we have in northwestern Minnesota, on obviously a much smaller scale, where there's some farmers and ranchers that are saying, "Hey, we got too many. I mean, there's too many elk here in Minnesota. They're destroying our fences. They're eating our hay. They're making it hard for us to operate our farms." Is that what's happening over there with this, or are these just people that want to build big homes and not have elk trample their nice lawns, or what's going on over there?
Yeah, good question. I mean, this battle's been going on in a number of different ways. I think there is I would boil it down to a real interest in, from some groups in trying to privatize the resource, whether that be through set aside tags for outfitters or for transferable landowner tags for the owner community. There's been a wide range of proposals put out there that have been struck down both by the legislature and by the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And then in response, I think those folks who were really pushing for some of those proposals, they didn't like getting no for an answer. And so the lawsuit has sort of been the last resort. And I think that's what we're seeing right now.
So a lot of this has to do with how many non-residents come over there and hunt elk then, in a sense.
That's one of many issues that's being debated as part of it. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, I want to talk about the Rendezvous before we let you guys go here, because that was a big event that just took place. Last year, I had Greg Qualley on the show right after he won the cook-off at the Rendezvous with his son last year. And Aaron, it sounds like he won it again this year?
He sure did. It was it was a big showing for Minnesota across the board, but the Cavallis did take home the trophy again this year. They made a Boundary Waters breakfast. So that was a raw pheasant egg, a corned venison hash. I'm going to forget some pieces, but a wild rice, pancake, and then the judges there, you can see in the photo, are all sitting on the canoe that they went out in to harvest the wild rice. And so really set the ambiance. If nothing else, the Cavallis definitely know how to make a presentation.
Yes.
But I guess in addition to them, they tied that whole thing to the Boundary Waters connections and some of the recent wins that we've had in the BWCA. And, on the Boundary Waters piece, Spencer Shaver and Lucas Leaf have won the award for the Sigurd F. Olson Award for Outstanding Conservation of a Wetland Habitat for their work in the Boundary Waters. So that's the Sportsman for the Boundary Waters guys. And then Rob Drieslein of Outdoor News won the Ted Trueblood Award for Outstanding work in his writing for conservation. So Minnesota did very well as far as awards and accolades brought home from this event. But no, it was a great showing. We had, it's kind of a guess, but somewhere between 400 and 500 people came out over the course of the weekend. We had chapter leader trainings on Thursday. We did on Friday our Brew Fest, which brought a bunch of folks in there. In the photo you can see that was sort of our awards dinner at the end. Folks from all over all over North America. So I spoke to folks from BC and Alberta, as well as every touch of the country, and it's just a blast, man. It's so fun to go out and talk to folks, and if you're into turkey hunting or upland hunting or foraging mushrooms, there was people there to talk to you about it. I talked to a guy from Missouri who I met while I was down there, and Greg and Pete are auctioning off on the live auction a ricing trip with them to go and harvest their own wild rice and then have it bagged, and then they can bring home a pile of wild rice. And this guy from Missouri said, "Man, I'd be really interested in bidding on that." And I said, "Jump in a golf cart with me. I'm headed over to see Greg right now." So he jumped in, and he and Greg got to talk for a while. And it's just that kind of connections of being able to connect one person with someone from somewhere else, and that maybe otherwise never would have found each other in the room, and putting them together and letting them go and nerd out on whatever the thing that they're interested in is.
So this takes place in Missoula?
Yeah. Yep. This one was in Missoula. Last year, was the first outdoor one in Missoula. Prior to that, for 2 years, COVID shut them down. We had been in Boise previous to that at more of a convention center style. So we kind of worked out some of the bugs. There was about 60 to 65 vendors that came out as well. So you had a lot of representation from some of the usual suspects as far as, the First Light, the Onyx, the Mystery Ranch, some of those type of bigger brands. But you also saw brands coming out that were local chapter supporters. Brew Tech from Montana, Drift West, the Ed Anderson's brand, some of those local smaller ones that were it was really cool to see them kind of coming out of the fray. I know that there was a couple of other Minnesota brands who were sort of there incognito to check it out. And I ended up running into them and they're like, man, we had no idea that this was this kind of party. It's fun. It's a lot of education. It's family friendly, and people just get fired up coming home, and they want to take that fire back to their own states, and that's the coolest part of it.
Yeah, I didn't know it was that big. How big, or how many days is it? And then how is it just open to chapter members, and do they have to pay? How does that all work?
Yeah, no, not at all. So it's open to the public. We usually put the ticket sales out online a few months ahead of time. And it's a ticketed event. You would go in, buy your ticket, and you can kind of piecemeal together if you want to go to the Brewfest, or if you want to go to the storytelling, or if you want a whole weekend ticket. We've got options for all of them. We had our campfire storytelling event with Room Map of Outdoor Afro, Mark Kenyon from the Meat Eater and Wired to Hunt podcast, David Wise, 3-time Olympian, Clay Hayes, the season 8 of Alone winner, all speak at that storytelling, and as well as like Trevor Hubbs of our AFI initiative. He kind of stole the show. I was unfortunately working Brewfest when he was telling his story, but it sounded like he told a tearjerker. So I'm looking forward to seeing that video after the fact.
Do we know when and where it is next year?
No official word yet, but I know it's going to be in Missoula. Not quite sure on the weekend. One downside we saw with it, it's just too tough to play with the weather. We had a lot of wind. We had a little rain. You do it this time of year, and it could be 90 and dry, or it could be 30 and snowy in Montana. So there's talk at this point of maybe moving it to an indoor venue just to not have to deal with those logistics. But at this point, we'll just keep everybody posted and keep an eye out for it.
Well, I'm sure there's a place out there, too, where you could do a combination of both and do some indoor events and some outdoor events, or have some space that you could move indoor if it's really bad, I bet.
Yeah, I think just having a contingency plan is the plan.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, where can people learn more about Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, become a member, or keep up on news? What should they do? Where should they go?
So I would direct everybody to backcountryhunters.org is our website, and you can break it down from there to visiting under Join BHA is how you would sign up for membership. And we've got memberships there for individuals, for families, discounts for college students or military members. And then from that same page, right next to the Join BHA tab, you can click on the chapter and highlight the chapter that you live in. When you sign up for a membership, your address will connect you with all the information from the Minnesota chapter or Wisconsin chapter or wherever you're at. But you're going to get information from your localized chapter. You're part of the headquarters chapter, the BHA as a whole kind of mothership, but you belong to that chapter at which your address is in. And then that can help you get in contact with your state. So here in Minnesota, it's just Minnesota@backcountryhunters.org. And I believe is it BHA_MN, Matt?
Yeah, BHA_MN on Instagram and Twitter. You can follow us there. We've got Pint Nights coming up in June in Bemidji at Bemidji Brewing on June 10th. Winona Pint Night with fly tying. That's in conjunction with Trout Unlimited and Trout Rods at Island City Brewing in Winona. We'll be at Game Fair. Come out and check us out there. for both weekends of that. And the first weekend of August, we're also sponsoring an archery shoot at South 40 Archers in Lakeville. So.
What about, we've got stations listening in Wisconsin, the Dakotas. Is there anything in those states coming up that you guys are aware of, or would you just direct them to go to their states, chapters, websites?
I would direct them to go to theirs. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can certainly reach out to those states directly. It'd just be, North Dakota or Wisconsin at backcountryhunters.org. I will say, I know that the Wisconsin Rendezvous is coming up July 30th. They've got their state version of what we just did out at Missoula coming up. So some seminars that are specific more to the Midwest, both on policy, kind of skills stuff. And they're getting pretty fired up about that one.
Do we have a Minnesota version coming?
Matt?
Our version will be coming up again in January. We did a winter rendezvous last year. It turned out to be a fantastic event. Everybody enjoyed it. It was out of Appledorn's Resort on Lake Mille Lacs. And it looks like we'll be planning that again for next year. We don't have the weekend lockdown yet, but it always got to be a bit of a trouble for us. All summer long, everybody wants to go through the lake. All fall, everybody wants to go hunting, and then in springtime everybody's looking to get back out fishing. So
it's tough. There's always something, and I'm going to be
one really cool part about our state rendezvous that we do in Minnesota that's a little different than some other states. That we talk about the walleyes winning the cook-off, but what doesn't get talked about as much is that they actually had to earn that spot to compete at the national rendezvous. So they had to cook at the state rendezvous in order to win that. And then that earned them the right to go compete for us at the headquarters or the North American Rendezvous. So it makes it that much more impressive that they did that 2 years in a row, won the state chapter in order to go out and win the North American Rendezvous. But actually, one of the last things that Pete and Greg said at their awards acceptance is that they were retiring as the winners. They were going to go out on top, and they weren't going to be competing next year because they wanted, new blood, new Minnesotans to have a chance at going to cook at Rendezvous. So the door is wide open at this point.
All right. So note to self: bring canoe to cook off next year. Okay.
Yes, no doubt.
How about the presentation? For sure, and a pheasant egg. Interesting.
Yep, pheasant egg.
Very good. All right, guys. Aaron Hebeisen, Tim Brass, Matt Lee, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Thanks for the time today. Keep up the good work, and good luck. Good luck this summer.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, bro. Appreciate it.
So much.
852 million acres of public land, 147 million private properties, all in the palm of your hand. The #1 hunting GPS app just got better. With hundreds of custom map layers, 3D and topographic maps, you can easily scout on the road or at home before you go. And now you can get important weather details, CWD detection, and even know what crops have been planted where. Get the most trusted hunting GPS app ever made. OnX. Know where you stand with OnX.
Did you know there are more than 1,000 lakes in Otter Tail County?
Yep, and I'm gonna fish as many as I can. I'm an outdoorsy otter. Nothing beats a full day of fishing for me. The lakes of Otter Tail County give me plenty of options to lower my boat and snag the perfect catch. Not an outdoorsy otter? No problem. Otter Tail County has something for everyone. You just need to find your inner otter.
To find your inner otter, go to OtterTailLakesCountry.com.
Well, walleyes are on everybody's mind right now, and the walleye bite, from what I hear, was insane for Erik Osberg up in Otter Tail Lakes Country. Erik, I feel like last time we talked to you was an insane crappie bite, and now it's been an insane walleye bite up there. Fishing's been good, it sounds like.
It's been a good spring, if that's what this is. We've been on a few good bites. The bite Randin Olson, a lockjaw guide service, and I fished in the Real Country Classic on Otter Tail Lake last weekend, and I can't remember if this is our third or our fourth or fifth time that we've fished in this tournament. And I'm not saying we've sucked every time we've done it, but we've never really felt good. coming off the lake. I mean, we had fun. We caught fish. We did whatever. But this, it wasn't like we were doing anything different or special or magical. It was just the stars and the moon and the sun all lined up. There you go. It's a 6 fish limit. You can have 4 unders, 2 overs. And the cool thing about the tournament is it's a 2-day format. So Friday is a day, and then you start over at 0 on Saturday. And we had, and culling is allowed, and we had 6 fish in the box by 9 a.m. on Friday, and then it was just a matter of trying to upgrade. And so by the end of the day, we had a 25 and a half and a 21 and a half. And our unders were all in that 8. That's the 25 and a half. The unders were all in that 18, 19, 19 and a half, 19 and 3/4. So we had 16.90 pounds on day 1. And then day 2 was a slower start. The air temp was down to 34 degrees. The water temp was down to 50 when we started. But eventually we found them again on Saturday, and we ended up with 15.91 pounds on Saturday. So we took 4th place on Friday, and we took 6th place overall. And we even got a cool trophy out of the deal. And so, it was Randin and I were joking. When Randin and I fish together, we're usually going for big fish. We're usually looking for monsters. And so we strike out a lot. And there was a moment on Saturday. So spot A was it wasn't a community spot, but there were a lot of boats there at the end of the day on Friday. And there were a lot of boats that started there on Saturday. There was no fish to be found when we got there Saturday. And so we went to spot B, and we had that whole spot to ourselves for about an hour and a half. And it was so much fun to be catching walleyes and looking for the right ones, right? Like those 19 and a halves are really valuable in an over under tournament like that. So it was 2 awesome days. Well, and then 3 because we fished on Thursday too. It was 3 really good days on the water.
How was your pre-fishing day versus the actual 2 tournament days then?
So pre-fishing was good. It was, and that's how we formulated our plan. We didn't want to beat up fish. We didn't want to find fish and then fish them pre-fishing, but we wanted to fish a little bit because we were in the boat and we had, we're all dressed up and we had rods and everything. So we had, basically we checked for, so our pre-fishing was good. The weather sucked in pre-fishing. It was raining. It was windy. It was cold, but we would get to a spot that we thought that we might want to fish. And if we caught a couple fish, we're like, yep, there's fish here. Let's get out of here. It was the first time, it's pretty rare that you find fish and then you intentionally leave them. But we, so there was a few spots that we fished in pre-fishing that were dead, but we knew we had a solid A, a solid B, and a solid C. That's pre-fishing right there. And I think that was our B plan. Or no, I think it doesn't matter. But pre-fishing was good. What I'll say is that, again, not that this is a secret or that we were the only ones doing this, but the jig we were using was a 16th ounce. And if you don't live and breathe walleye fishing, a 16th ounce might sound really small because it is. But we were, Randin was running the boat and we were dragging a 16th ounce jig tipped with a shiner in 8 to 11 feet of water. And they were just kind of relating to flat areas. And so you'd be dragging that 16th ounce jig, and that wind makes it really hard to get it on the bottom.
Right.
And the fish, it was very rare that you would feel a tink or a bite. It was more like, oh, I think it's heavier than it used to be. And then you would give it a little bit, and then, oh, yep, I think that's a fish. I'm going to set the hook, and then boom, it'd be a 19-inch walleye. So, So yeah, it was a fun bite.
So Saturday, water temperature drops, air temperatures drop. Did you find fish doing the same thing? Were they in different places? Did you have to change up tactics?
We didn't change up tactics per se, but they did, like our spot A, where so where we were going to start Saturday. There was a ton of fish there on Friday, and it's a big area, right? Like it's not like a little rock pile; it's a big flat, and they were gone. I don't know. Like they either went into 4 feet of water or 22 feet of water. We didn't find them. So yeah, absolutely, we had to change locations anyways. And so yeah, we didn't necessarily change tactics. The one thing that we did do, so you start getting your keeper fish, but they're in the smaller 15, 16 inch range. And obviously you want those bigger unders. So once we had a few fish in the box, then I would switch to a plastic or a stick bait or a ripping shad, just something different to try to trigger a big fish bite. And it was pretty cool because, and Randin's a pro, right? Like he's really good. He outfished me 10 fish to 1 on Friday. I will say I contributed the big one on Friday, and I got us going on Saturday. So it was I wasn't just a net man. But at one point Randin picked up he had a 1/4 ounce jig with a big like a paddle tail, a white paddle tail, and just aggressively ripping that through those fish. And I think that's how we got our biggest fish on Saturday. And so I got a few fish on plastics on Friday, and then we got I think two bigger fish on Saturday came aggressively ripping a plastic. So it's weird, right? Like they'll barely bite that minnow, they'll just barely nibble it, but then you throw a big, huge, gaudy plastic at them, and they're like, whoa, and they smack it. So,
do you think that was it a different? Were you fishing the live bait differently than the plastic? I mean, was it just more of an aggressive reaction bite, you think, with what Randin was doing?
Well, it's, yeah, the short answer is yeah. I mean, it's definitely a different tactic. And the thing is you can't be that aggressive with a minnow on a hook. You know what I mean? Or a minnow on a jig. If you try ripping it like that, 2 or 3 rips, and now you don't have a minnow anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's the so to answer your question, yeah, it's a different, the stick bait that I was throwing, I'm aggressively ripping that through the water. What my hypothesis, I don't even know if it's a theory, is you're basically just looking to create a reaction, mm-hmm. right? When you're using a 16th ounce jig tipped with a shiner, you're trying to get them to eat it. Right? Like they're feeding. When you're ripping a big plastic or a big hard, stick bait or ripping shad or whatever, you're just trying to freak them out a little bit. Like, oh my gosh, what is that? Oh, I better go eat it. And then they smack it.
Well, if it works, right. And it's kind of nice to have 2 different people doing different things in the boat too. See what's working and what's not working like that. I fished.
Well, and it's nice I love a jig and a minnow, but I can only sit there and do that, for so many hours. Eventually I need to move around, or I need to spend some energy, or I need to, you get to warm up by casting, so it's just a nice change of pace for me anyways.
I've been trying to go with more plastics lately and trying to get away, just trying to get better at it, right? And trying to get away from live bait. I don't know how many times I've left minnows in my bucket and forget about them in the garage. They either freeze in the winter, and then I got to bring them in the house to thaw them out and then deal with them, or they die in the basement or in the garage, and then I got to deal with them. So I've been trying to get better at plastics, and there's been times where I've outfished the guys using meat or live bait, and then the other day we fished, and I definitely got beat by the guys using live bait. So it's funny how it goes back and forth like that.
For sure.
But all right, Eric. Well, if people want to come up and do some fishing on Otter Tail or one of the other 1,000+ lakes in Otter Tail Lakes Country, what should they do?
They can find their inner otter at ottertaillakescountry.com.
Northern Minnesota's Walleye Factory is a year-round world-class fishing destination. The perfect getaway this summer is just a short drive to Lake of the Woods. Fish Big Traverse Bay, the Rainy River, or visit the unique Northwest Angle. To catch big fish, you have to go where the big fish are. Plan your trip to Lake of the Woods at lakeofthewoodsmn.com. That's lakeofthewoodsmn.com.
Well, we're in the process of trying to get another trip planned to Lake of the Woods right now with the family, hoping this year to get up to the Northwest Angle. And right now we're going to talk to somebody that was just up there, Joe Henry from Lake of the Woods Tourism. I like to say you were doing a little pre-fishing for us to let us know where we should fish later this summer, Joe. But why were you up at the Angle?
Well, you know what, we have both on the South Shore and up at the Northwest Angle, I put together every year what I call a resort stakeholder meeting. And I pull together DNR Fisheries does a state of the fishery report to, resorts, guides, and other stakeholders. But we also have, DNR parks, we have DNR enforcement, DNR wildlife, talking about a new bear zone up at the Northwest Angle, how deer population's going. And we have normally the Coast Guard, we have U.S. Customs, U.S. Border Protection, Canada Border Services, Canadian Consulate, with some representatives from, Congresswoman Fishbach's office and Senator Tina Smith's office this time. And oftentimes we get Senator Klobuchar to chime in too, and her people, and really a lot of support. But to have one big powwow where all the stakeholders come together and share information, do a Q&A, it's just very good information for what we try to accomplish up there, and very good meeting.
I bet it was an interesting one after what's gone on the last couple of years up there. Obviously, things are basically open back up. You need the shot to get across the border, though. Was there anything, any newsworthy things that came out of it, or any insight that you'd like to share with us about what the future might look like?
Well, I mean, I'll just, don't really know the future of what it's going to be like going through Canada to go to the Angle. But what I can share is we're very, very privileged to have Ariel DeLuya, who's the Consul General of the Canadian Consulate. Now, the Canadian Consulate is based out of Minneapolis, and they represent Canada to 5 states, including Minnesota. And we're privileged to have him up there. I had a chance to take him fishing for a day. We had a chance to have, dinner and meetings, and he had fresh walleye, and he caught over 20 walleyes. He got a 27-incher. He hadn't fished since he's been 12 years old.
Wow.
But, we spent time together, and it was, I really say kudos to him for taking the time to learn more about the Northwest Angle. Certainly the Angle, with all the border relations with Canada, pops up on his radar screen quite often. And, to truly be somewhere, see it, understand it, process it, talk with a lot of locals, find out what the issues are, find out, what he can maybe do something about. That's why he was there. And so that was great. Things like you got to fill out the Arrive Can app when you go up to the Northwest Angle. Well, basically the way the app is set up right now, you have to actually put in, even though you're traveling to the Northwest Angle Inlet, Minnesota, you need to put in there a Canadian postal code in order to make the system work. And just little things like that we'd like to say, hey, wouldn't it make sense for the 4 exclaves across the U.S.-Canada border, wouldn't there be nice to have a button that says transiting through Canada to an exclave or something to that effect, which then we wouldn't have to basically put incorrect information down to appease the system. Certainly, Canada Border Services Agency understands what's happening, and they're okay with it, but it's confusing to people. I, by the way, have made screenshots of every screen of that process. I'm going to write an article about it, so people will have a step-by-step guide, at least for the time being, until they fix it.
Sure. I get questions like that all the time, and we're getting ready to go across the border, and every day I'm looking at the border crossing rules just to see if anything's changed, just to kind of stay up on it, because it can get confusing, and particularly after the last couple of years. And what a unique situation up there at the Northwest Angle. I'm sure somebody like that person that you had there, if they've never been there, but they've just heard about it, it makes a big difference when you go there and actually see it and see what's going on there. It just makes it easier to understand.
Like anything, to experience it is like, oh, this is what they're talking about. Oh, this is what they mean. Oh, now I see what they're talking. Oh, yeah, I had to use the ArriveCAN app myself. I called CBSA, and the first time, I got disconnected, and then I had to call somebody else, and they didn't understand where the Northwest Angle was, so I had to ask for a supervisor. For him to go through that process is just very beneficial for our area, and he kind of gets a flavor of kind of what we deal with all the time with things. And, I'm not saying things are terrible, but there's things that need to be corrected, and he's the kind of person with his connections and what he does that can really benefit. And I'll tell you, it's not only a benefit to people traveling to the Angle or residents of the Angle, but it's also a benefit to Canada, because CBSA gets a better reputation. They spend a lot less time explaining. They get much better information to make the decisions, which is really their mission of, should we let this person into Canada? In case they're a bad person or have other intentions. So it all works out good. It's a win-win. But again, it's that old saying, people don't care what you know until they know how much you care. And the fact that he came up and was willing to spend that kind of time and really entrench himself into the culture really means a lot to us. And it's going to pay dividends on both sides.
Did you have to talk him into going fishing?
I didn't. He was really willing. He hadn't been fishing since he'd been 12 years old. And it's funny. I always talk about doing a milk run. I didn't know where the fish were, and we stayed on the Minnesota side, and we went to one spot, and first I started out right in front of the resort and just started pulling crankbaits, and got a nice pike, probably a 7-pounder. Had another big one on, lost it in a matter of not very long at all, and then I got bit off. So I'm like, okay, this is all pike. I was hoping there'd be walleyes here, but you want to talk about action? I mean, there was a lot of fish there. So then we moved to another spot I'd fished before. And we trolled through there and caught a nice walleye right away. But only got one, and then we got bit off by another pike, lost another lure. And then we ended up going to another spot that's kind of a go-to spot. Didn't mark any fish, didn't catch any fish. Went to another spot, didn't catch any fish. Went to Garden Island. We walked around Garden Island State Recreation Area a little bit, showed them the beaches. And
cool.
And there's a shelter there, kind of an emergency shelter for boaters and snowmobilers, that if you get in trouble, the door's always open, and there's a wood or a propane stove in there to stay warm. And I just showed them that, and showed them the picnic tables and docks where people have shore lunches. And we saw bear tracks on the island, both large and small, so probably a sow or cub. And then we shot to another spot I kind of knew, and we hit gold. I mean, first pass we got 2, spun around, another pass, caught 2 more. Spun around, caught 2 more. I mean, we were throwing walleyes back, and I think he caught over 20 walleyes. His big fish was, 27 inches. It was a big fish. It was great fishing. Went and had a good meal. He had a fresh walleye that was literally swimming an hour before, and he said it's some of the best fish he ever had. Of course, we stopped at one of our resorts that made it up for him, and just really giving him the immersion of the Northwest thing. Got to tell you guys, we went back. We had that meeting on Tuesday, which is today, and we had that meeting and had dinner afterwards, and I had about an hour or so of daylight. So I went out and I said, okay, can I catch a limit of walleyes in that short a time? Well, I got my walleyes, and not only that, I got I'll tell you the truth. I got 3 walleyes. I had that 4th walleye.
Wait a minute.
4 times.
No, those words have never come out of the mouth of any angler before. Wait a minute. I'll tell you the truth.
I caught 3 walleyes, 3 keepers. I had the 4th one on 4 times. I had it up the boat 4 times, and it somehow flopped off all 4 times. Of course, I'm trying to swing them, and because I'm in a hurry. And so that was kind of frustrating. And then I ended up getting a big fish on. I'm like, oh, this is probably a big walleye, not what I need right now. Well, it was about a 20-pound pike. So I did a couple of selfies of that, but I couldn't get the whole fish in the camera because it was so big. So I released her and did a video of that. And then I shot right in front of the resort, and it was dark. And I was pulling the area right in front of the resort in the dark. And I had my 4th walleye on 4 times and lost it 4 times. I'm like, what the heck? So I go into the fish cleaning shack, go clean my 3 walleyes. There's some guys in there that have a pile of big crappies they got on the Ontario side, big crappies. And I helped them clean those up, and they said, oh, man, we're fishing another day. here, you need one more walleye, take this one. I'm like, no, take it. We're fishing tomorrow. So, I mean, it all worked out.
Sometimes you need a little help to get your limit, Joe.
I was so competitive, man. I was fishing in the dark. I'm like, and I was getting bit in the dark in that stained water, So I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Not encouraging people to go fishing in the dark in Lake of the Woods necessarily, unless they're in fish house, because it's big water and you got to know what you're doing. And there's, but it was right in front of the resort, literally right in front of the buoys of the resort. And I was getting hit, and I got hit numerous times. I missed them. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? So anyway. But it was cool. It was really cool. I mean, I had that much action right in front of the resort in that short of a time. It was neat.
Were you pulling crankbaits the whole time?
No. What I did when I went out in front of the resort at the end, I had a crawler harness tied on, and I didn't have any crawlers. So I had minnows. So I put a minnow on each hook. So I had a 2-hook harness, and I put a minnow on each hook, which I never do that. And they're hitting just fine. I mean,
Sometimes it doesn't matter.
It's the angle.
Just doesn't matter. That's right. Well, Joe, if people want to plan a trip to the Northwest Angle or Lake of the Woods, where can they find out more information?
Yeah, you know what? Up-to-date information on Facebook and Instagram for Lake of the Woods Tourism. Otherwise, check out our website, and that is lakeofthewoodsmn.com.
Sporting Journal Radio is a division of Macaba LLC. If you've got a question, comment, or story idea for us, send us an email. Go to sportingjournalradio.com. While you're there, you can learn how to advertise on the show and visit our store for hats, hoodies, coffee mugs, and more. Go to sportingjournalradio.com.